Hello there, and welcome back to War Thunder to the first ship review of patch 1.99. So, please give me a few minutes to make a few statements here right in the beginning in the harbor. First of all, this ship review is about the Imperial Japanese Navy's heavy cruiser, the Tone, and yes, it's called Tone and not Tone, despite written like this in English. The second is that this will obviously include a 5-minute guide by the ever-awesome Drachinifel, about the historical career of this ship and its class. Then the third thing is, obviously I got this ship from a test drive for a month from Gaijin for review purposes, otherwise I wouldn't have access to the ship, and it is obviously fully upgraded. More about this in a moment. The next thing is, I said that I won't do any sort of ship videos anytime soon, and that has been true for the last patch, which was absolutely dominated by the HE one-shot blast splashes from the Admiral Graf Spee's 11-inch guns. And I think that there are multiple things coming together why I make a ship review on this thing. First of all, I still have to grind the rest of the Italian tech tree, so patience, I'm working on it, but it takes a bit time. The next thing is that this ship has, as you can clearly see, a very unique arrangement of the main batteries, which is all placed in the forward part of the ship, which makes for an absolutely amazing, unique playstyle, which you will see in the footage later on. And obviously, the Admiral Graf Spee's HE was nerfed, but meaning the HE for the 11-inch guns was nerfed to a ridiculously poor state means that this ship isn't that popular anymore, which is good. But it also has cost all other heavy cruisers and light cruisers and even destroyers dearly, because their HE is also kind of in a bad state. So while I really like that there is now more emphasis on using AP, the problem is the stock grind for all other cruisers. So in order to bring balance to the Graf Spee, more or less, Gaijin screwed over all other cruisers in the game and their stock grind. That's just how Gaijin does it. I'm not a fan of this, don't blame me, I don't agree with this, that's Gaijin for you. Coming back to the ship. I think it's not the hardest hitting Japanese ship. When it comes to DPM, obviously the Mogami beats it, as well as then with a bit more alpha strike, if you will. But also the Mikuma just can spam significantly more shells. We will see how it compares to other heavy cruisers of other nations in just a moment. But be assured that this ship is cool. Now, I haven't played too many other cruisers, but it is definitely better than the Trento, which is just sad. And also, I would say that the accuracy of those guns, maybe because of the placement, maybe because of how it looks, is significantly better than some other 8-inch shells or guns. You know what? Without further ado, let's see what comes of it, and we begin with, as promised, the 5-minute guide from Drachinifel. I hope you enjoy.
Despite being written in English as Tone, this is actually the Tone class of cruiser. These were the last heavy cruisers actually completed for the Imperial Japanese Navy. Now, at first, these were supposed to be the 5th and 6th vessels in the Mogami class. However, by the time construction started, there were some serious flaws that had been identified in the Mogami class, and the design was revised. Particularly, this centred around the 4th Fleet incident of 1935, where a number of ships had either been damaged or, in the case of a few destroyers, actually sunk as a result of the construction being too light. These revisions, along with Japan stepping away from the London Naval Treaty, allowed the ships to be redesigned in quite a radical way. Although the Mogamis had been laid down as light cruisers, with 5 triple 6-inch turrets, 3 forward and 2 aft, the Tones were eventually revised to have 4 twin 8-inch turrets, and unusually all of these would be concentrated forward. The first and second turrets would be super firing of turrets facing forward, whilst turrets 3 and 4 would face aft. This would mean the entire forward battery was concentrated in the forward arc of the ship. The secondary battery would consist of 8 5-inch guns. These were dual-purpose units in twin shielded mounts, 12 25mm anti-aircraft guns in 6 pairs, and 12 torpedo tubes in 4 triple mounts, 2 per side. Now you might be wondering, well, with 8 8-inch guns up front, what are they putting on the back if they're not putting main battery guns? Well, the answer is aircraft. You see, unlike American and British carriers, no Japanese carrier aircraft were delegated to the role of reconnaissance. So reconnaissance had to be carried out for the fleet by the aircraft carried on cruisers, and cruisers generally had relatively limited space with between 1 and 3 aircraft. So with the Tonei class, with the entire rear section of the ship dedicated to aircraft carriage, more aircraft could be carried, and this would, in theory, allow for the ships to provide full reconnaissance coverage for the Japanese Navy. Due to the aforementioned 4th Fleet incident showing that the welded hulls of the Mogami class were somewhat weak, the Tonei only incorporated some welding, and its sister ship, the Chikuma, was an all-riveted design, these 2 ships forming the total build run of the Tonei class. To improve stability and make construction easier, the ships also had a straight upper hull, and the superstructure was far less built up than typical Japanese ships of the 1930s. In theory, each ship could carry between 6 and 8 aircraft, although in practice no more than 5 were ever actually embarked. As you might imagine, these particular ships had very distinctive profiles and were easily recognisable. Once commissioned, the 2 ships formed the 8th Cruiser Squadron and would operate together for the rest of the war. As such, both ships would be present for the Pearl Harbor attacks, with the Tonei and Chikuma both conducting aerial reconnaissance over Oahu in preparation for the attacks themselves. After various minor operations in the aftermath of Pearl Harbor, which included their aircraft being used as light strike aircraft, the next major operation the 2 ships took part in was the attack on Port Darwin in Australia, where 15 aircraft and 11 ships on the Allied side were destroyed by the combined Japanese assault. This included a Royal Australian Air Force Catalina flying boat, which the Tonei's float planes shot down. The ships would then take part in raids in the Indian Ocean, which succeeded in destroying a number of Royal Navy vessels and Royal Air Force aircraft. And then they took part in the Battle of Midway, where perhaps the flaw in this particular ship's design was shown up. Due to internal bureaucracy in the command structure, although Tonei's float planes discovered the American fleet, this report was not immediately passed to the carriers, and this played a key role in the eventual Japanese defeat by American forces. Conversely, the Chikuma's aircraft was able to spot the Enterprise at the Battle of Eastern Solomons and was thus responsible for the strike called in which damaged the ship. In both of these battles, the ships were attacked by American aircraft but survived. At the Battle of Santa Cruz, the ship's aircraft were vital in discovering the American forces and again resulted in successful attacks, this time sinking the carrier Hornet. Both ships would then receive an increased anti-aircraft battery of up to 20 additional 25mm guns, before taking part in numerous escort and troop transport missions towards the end of 1943. At the beginning of 1944, Cruiser Division 8 was disbanded, and they were reassigned to Cruiser Division 7 alongside the Suzuya and the Kumano. The ships were present for the Battle of the Philippine Sea, with Chikuma having been repaired from bomb damage suffered during the Battle of Santa Cruz. However, this saw pretty much the entirety of the Japanese air fleet destroyed, as far as the naval forces were concerned. And so soon after, the rear aircraft decks were replaced with more anti-aircraft guns, bringing the total 25mm anti-aircraft battery up to 54 guns. Radar was also fitted, but this was pretty much the extent of the refits the ships would receive. Both ships would then be committed to the Battle of Leyte Gulf along with the rest of their cruiser division, but even their heavily enhanced anti-aircraft batteries could not save the Musashi from being sunk, and Tonei herself was hit by bombs. The following day saw the Battle of Samar itself, and although Tonei engaged the American destroyer Heermann, the Chikuma was lost in the battle along with the cruisers Chokai and Suzuya. This again showed the relative lack of capacity of Japanese anti-aircraft naval firepower, since ironically the ship was taken down by multiple American torpedo bomber strikes. Following this, Tonei was given an even heavier light anti-aircraft battery with a total of 62 guns, but was reduced to a training ship as fuel and personnel shortages began to bite in the Imperial Japanese Navy. The end would come on 24th of July 1945 when Task Force 38 launched a large raid against the Japanese naval base at Kure, and 9 aircraft hit the Tone with 3 bombs, causing her to settle to the bottom of the bay.
Now let's have a look at the ship in port in War Thunder, and let's begin as usual with the armor. And we can see that the bulkhead in the front has 175 millimeters of thickness, and the lower part of the barbette 105, but it's a rather narrow target. On the other hand, there is practically no icebreaker or no distributed armor plating to detonate AP prematurely. Then the lower part of the front belt, where the main batteries are located, is 75 millimeters thick, but with angling, and it has some inclination angling. The effective thickness is way bigger. Then we also have the upper part right at the waterline with 145 millimeters, and this is also pretty good when angled, and even with raw thickness it beats a lot of even other nations' heavy cruisers that have outright no armor plating or no belt armor, or 70 millimeters or 80 millimeters. So this is quite good. Then where the machinery is located, we have 45 millimeters for below the waterline, and right at the waterline and even above the waterline 100 millimeters. Again, inclined to give some extra protection. The rear end of the ship has some protection for the steering mechanism, and then we have the bulkhead here, where the float planes are located, of 105 millimeter. The deck plating is 31 millimeter, and there is something that I can only describe as a half turtleback, 65 millimeters. So that is decent as well. However, the deck plating for the magazine part is 56 millimeters, and that will ricochet a lot of AP, and it also will absorb a lot of HE shells. Then we come to the main armament, and yeah, the turret's barbette is only 25 millimeter, and the turrets themselves also below 25 millimeter. All around, turret front, turret side, barbette all around. And that means even high explosive can knock them out, and AP has absolutely no trouble in dealing damage to them. But there is one little interesting side note. The bottom part of the barbette is protected from the front with 100 millimeters, and from the rear with 75 millimeters of armor, where the elevation, where the ammo elevator is, which is good. Otherwise, you just could pen here the barbette and then go right through this hole with your armor piercing shell directly into the magazine, which, you know, is not a nothing. You know, this is a considerable part of the deck plating space. So this is great to have it, and yeah, I think that this allows the ship to pull off this angling. So when it comes to the reverse angling, as I said, you can use this angle and still bring all your guns to bear, fire the full 8 guns. And then let's have a look at the ship's effective armor thickness. Now, for the rear part, it's not that great as it actually is, because, you know, the angle from our perspective is different than from shells that are coming in. So here we have then 150 millimeters, 170 millimeters for the rear bulkhead and the side plating. But here at the front there is no bulkhead to hit, except maybe here this little triangle, but you know, that is a real freak shot. And then the lower part is still, depending on exactly where you look, 250 to over 375 millimeter. And for the upper belt, this is exciting because it's always 500 millimeters plus, so you can at distance bounce all 8-inch AP shots, and this is where then the survivability comes from. Now, looking at the X-ray, we can see that there are considerable fuel tanks. Now, if you do the reverse angling, then they will get set on fire quite a lot, which is sad. But also your light AA, all the triple 25 millimeters, can shoot at aircraft that are coming from the enemy side without any sort of obstacle. Then we can also observe the torpedoes. And the torpedoes, well, in the stat card it says that there are 12 of the infamous Type 93 Model 1 Mod 2 long launches, but here we can clearly see that we have 4 triple launchers, but then there are also some reloadable torpedoes, reserve torpedoes. So I think it should be 24. At the moment you can only use 12 overall, but I think this will get fixed soon, or it is an X-ray mistake, but I doubt that. So overall it should be 24. The biggest downside of the ship is that here the ammunition storage with the 93,000 shells for the 25 millimeters, I guess, yeah, it's stored here between the funnels, and if this goes boom, it's a considerable part that goes boom, and that will deal a great deal that will deal a great damage to the ship. And then we come obviously to the front magazines, and they are obviously big and spacious and easy to hit, but they are protected pretty well, although then there are also the fuel tanks around them, just to keep the ammunition warm, I guess. And yeah, it is right at the waterline, maybe a touch below the waterline, but it still can be hit if it wants to make that turn to then kite away to reverse angle. So the ship, when used right, is really great, and especially when you do the reverse angling, you can fire the torpedoes because of the torpedo tube's firing angles, which are more orientated to the back rather than to the front. And obviously also the main armament can be hidden behind the superstructure and yeah, the citadel armor. So this thing, when used correctly, can be ridiculously tanky. Finally, we come to a statistical comparison of the ships, which is what you're all here for, right? Right. So the IJN Tonnerre in its 1945 configuration powers 8 8-inch guns, aka 203mm. As you can see, this is rather standard, and you have 960 rounds of ammunition, and this sounds okayish, but in actual fact you're sometimes alive for so long that you can actually run through your entire ammunition capacity, and especially when you run out of the mandatory ammunition type for whatever situation you're in, this is kind of painful because you don't have really the most exciting secondaries. The reload with 12 seconds again is fairly standard for 8-inch guns. On the other hand, you're beaten by the Kirov because it has 7-inch-ish guns, and obviously you're beating the likes of Pensacola and Graf Spee. The effective DPM with 40 shells per minute, again on first glance, looks like it's fairly standard, but you're having the same problem just like the Mogami and the London and many other heavy and light cruisers, in that your turrets get knocked out fairly quickly, even by low caliber HE shells or by AP shells, and then obviously if you lose one turret, it's only 30 shells per minute, and you can see that this is quite painful. But on the other hand, if you're angling away, if you're kiting away, if you increase the combat distance, if you are opening the distance and you use your armor effectively, you're in the game for much longer than the likes of London, Prinz Eugen and Kirov, because you just are alive thanks to your armor. Yes, there are always a freak shell here and there, but at the end of the day you have the time to repair your turrets, and you always can hide the turrets behind your superstructure. Now let's talk about the torpedoes, and as I said, at the moment we have 12 of the infamous 610mm Type 93 long lances. They have the heaviest warheads, they have the longest range with 20 kilometers, and they are the fastest torpedoes with 93 kilometers per hour. And you should have 24, which also would give you the joint most, just like with the Mogami. I hope that this gets fixed anytime soon. Then the displacement with 15.2 thousand tons is fairly heavy, but it gets obviously beaten by the Germans, and you're only roughly 110 tons heavier than the Mogami, which is fairly similar. The top speed, on the other hand, with 66 kilometers per hour, gets only beaten by the Kirov, and this is indeed very nice. But you are not head and shoulders above anybody else, although the difference to the Admiral Graf Spee is noticeably. The crew amount is definitely not the highest, but you're only getting really beaten by the Prinz Eugen and the Admiral Graf Spee, and in comparison to anybody else, only the Mogami has more. So far so good, so it looks really solid. Let's talk about the business end, let's talk about what the guns actually fire. Let's begin with the stock high explosive, the 20.3 centimeter type OHE, and it is a 125.4 kilogram heavy warhead with a muzzle velocity of 835 meters per second, a bursting charge of 8.6 kilograms, and 61 millimeters of penetration at any distance versus any angle. And if you look into the comparison, that is not outstandingly bad, but in fact it is the worst when it comes to the raw statistics. Now at the moment, high explosive is really underwhelming, even versus destroyers, but you still can hull break patrol boats, and you also can cause floodings and fires when hitting the superstructure or unarmored ship hulls. The next shell type is the 20.3 centimeter type 91 AP, and it is APBC as a shell type, so not APCBC. It has a mass velocity of 835 meters per second for a 125.8 kilogram heavy warhead, and we have a penetration value at point blank range of 363 millimeters, and at 10 kilometers of still 235. And this is kind of in the middle of the pack. In fact, if we take out the HMS London out of the equation, it is actually some of the worst actually. On the other hand, it is still effective because the bursting charge of 3.25 kilograms will cause some damage, but even that is not the highest. So it is not the most amazing shell, but it does the job. That's the comparison, that's the summary of it, and it is absolutely mandatory even versus light cruisers, even versus the likes of Atlanta and especially American destroyers that will absorb your high explosive on their anti-fragmentation belt, which at the moment is broken and outright ridiculous. The third shell type is the 20.3 centimeter type O high explosive or type 0 high explosive, and it is practically the stock high explosive with a time fuse. So this might be one of the heaviest flak shells in the game. 8.6 kilograms of bursting charge, 61 millimeters of penetration, a mass velocity of 835 meters per second. However, the reload and also the turret traverse speed is not really suitable for anti-aircraft duty, except if you see somebody coming for quite a distance and you know that he's coming for you. So that has been the statistical summary of the ship, and as you can see here in the gameplay, this is now the scene where I'm angling away, where I'm kiting away, where I'm playing with my speed and the angle, and I still can punch or can dish out punishing salvos on the enemy. Now, don't get me wrong, this will not save the ship from any engagement. This will not save the ship in any situation. The right map, the right situation has to be found. If you get in the crossfire, you will die still. But this being an absolute distraction and dueling enemy cruisers at long range is what the ship is good at, what the ship excels at, and what its selling point is, and what I personally recommend it for. In that aspect, it is one of the more unique cruisers in War Thunder, and I think that the torpedoes are great, the guns do the job, the armor, when angled correctly, is absolutely amazing, but there are obviously downsides to this ship. First of all, the guns, while doing the job, they are not ultra amazing, but they are okay. But what really is a bit of a downside is the anti-aircraft capabilities. While you have 12 triple mounts, 18 single mounts, and 4 twin mounts of the 25mm, adding up to 62 barrels, you just lack the stopping power, you just lack the muzzle velocity and the range and overall the effectiveness. And your heavy A, while being 5-inch, you only have 4 per broadside in 2 twin turrets, 4 overall. They don't have the survivability, they don't have the rate of fire to make up for the lack of DPM, and also they don't have proximity fuse shells or variable time fuse shells, which would increase their effectiveness just that little bit. So this ship is still vulnerable versus crossfires, versus aircraft attacks, and also the secondaries versus anti-ship duties are not really all that great. And while the armor of the ship keeps it alive overall for quite a while if angled correctly, as you can see here, the matter of a fact is your turrets So it's not a pure discussion of black and white. This is a ship that has to be put into the right circumstances, and then it excels. And for that, I actually love it. I actually think that this is one of the more unique cruisers in War Thunder, and I actually had quite a bit of fun playing with that thing, believe it or not. So without further ado, I think that has been it for this ship review. I hope you enjoyed the 5-minute guide by Drachinifel. I hope you enjoyed my statistical analysis and the gameplay in the background. If so, please give this video a like if you did, subscribe if you want to see more, and we'll see each other on the battlefields, in the skies, and on the waves of War Thunder.